Good morning, students. In this video, I'm going to explain the story from your supplementary reader, Footprints Without Feet. The name of the story is A Triumph of Surgery, written by James Harriet. Triumph means a great victory. In this story, without any surgery or medicine, the dog got cured. That was a great victory. Before we start, let me throw some light on author James Alfred Wright Harriet. He was an English veterinary surgeon and writer. He was born on 3rd October 1916 in England. James Harriet was his pen name. He wrote a series of books of stories about animals and their masters. He died on 23rd February 1995 at the age of 78. The story, A Triumph of Surgery, revolves around an ill dog named Tricky and his mistress, Mrs. Pumphrey. The dog was hugely fat. His eyes were blood red. Mrs. Pumphrey gave him malt, cod liver oil, and bowl of Horlicks. Still, Tricky had no energy. The doctor advised her to cut down sweet things. Tricky left eating and kept vomiting. He was to be hospitalized. Do you want to know what happened next? For that, listen to the story carefully. I know you all will enjoy the story about a pampered dog named Tricky. Let's see what happened in Triumph of Surgery by James Harriet. James Harriet, a veterinarian doctor, narrates the story of Tricky, the dog, and how he gets better. He saw Tricky one day with his owner, Mrs. Pumphrey. James was shocked to see Tricky's appearance. He was seriously overweight and had bloodshot eyes. He looks like a blotted sausage. Mrs. Pumphrey quickly explained that she thought Tricky was suffering from malnutrition. So she fed him some malt, cod liver oil, and a bowl of Horlicks every night, but nothing works. She also confessed that she fed him some cream, cakes, and chocolate. James realized the situation was bad. He knew Tricky could never say no to food. So he gave the lady some stern advice that she must give the dog some exercise. She must keep him on a very strict diet, otherwise he will fall ill. However, as he watched Mrs. Pumphrey walk away with Tricky, he thought it wouldn't be long before he heard from her. Sure enough, Mrs. Pumphrey called a few days later. It seemed Tricky does not eat and was suffering from bouts of vomiting. James had already made a plan by then. He knew that the only way to cure Tricky was to get him away from the house and into his clinic. He advised her that Tricky needs to be hospitalized for a fortnight, that means for 2 weeks. Mrs. Pumphrey almost fainted at the suggestion. James carried Tricky to his clinic. The whole household staff rushed about getting blankets, bowls, clothes, and toys for Tricky. The narrator, realizing that, quickly drove away. At his clinic, the dogs came rushing to him. Tricky saw them lying motionless and with dull eyes. A bed for Tricky was made in a warm, loose box. For 2 days, he was given plenty of water and no food. On the second day, Tricky started showing some interest in his surroundings. On the third day, the narrator led Tricky to the dogs playing in the yard. Tricky followed the dogs around as they played. Later, when the dogs were fed, Tricky sniffed their bowls, licking casually inside one or two of them. Tricky's progress was rapid. He had no medical treatment of any kind. The next day, when a bowl was set from him, he joined the other dogs for his meal. That was a turning point for Tricky. From then, he made rapid progress. He started fighting with them for food and hunting rats at night. As Mrs. Pumphrey heard about his recovery, she started bringing eggs to build up his strength. Then she started sending wine and brandy to improve Tricky's constitution. James and his partner enjoyed that drink at dinner. James was tempted to keep Tricky permanently, if only for the fine spirits and the eggs. But he knew that Mrs. Pumphrey was suffered, so he called her and gave her a good news about Tricky's recovery. Within minutes, Mrs. Pumphrey arrived at the clinic. There was a marked change in Tricky now. He had been transformed into a flexible, hard-muscled animal. No longer was he a fat-bloated animal. Now he was agile and well-muscled and kept up well with James' dogs. James carried Tricky back to Mrs. Pumphrey's car. The minute Tricky saw his mistress, he jumped out of James' arms and rushed at Mrs. Pumphrey. She tried to defend herself as Tricky barked and licked her face. Mrs. Pumphrey, with tearful eyes, thanked James. She believed it was triumph of surgery. So, by this story, we come to know that one should not be pampered. Overindulgence and pampering beyond a limit becomes unproductive. Be it a pet or a child, discipline is very necessary. I hope you all have enjoyed this story and learned a lesson from it. Thank you and have a nice day.